The Salem Witch Trials. When fear became the law, a girl started screaming, and 19 people died for it. In the winter of 1692, in a small Puritan village in Massachusetts, a handful of young girls began having violent fits, convulsions and outbursts nobody could explain. By the time the terror finally ended less than a year later, 20 people had been executed, hundreds more had been accused, and an entire community had turned on itself so completely that neighbors sent neighbors to the gallows based on nothing more than a whispered accusation and a shared, contagious fear. It began in January of 1692 in the household of Reverend Samuel Parris, when his 9-year-old daughter Betty and 11-year-old niece Abigail began exhibiting bizarre, violent behavior, screaming uncontrollably, contorting their bodies into unnatural positions, and complaining of invisible sensations described as pinching or biting. When a local doctor, unable to identify any physical cause for the symptoms, suggested the girls might be suffering from supernatural affliction, the community's worst fears found a name: witchcraft, and the accusations that followed spread with terrifying speed. Salem Village in 1692 was primed for exactly this kind of crisis. The community had spent years locked in bitter disputes over property lines, church leadership, and deep-seated resentments between established families and newer arrivals, tensions further compounded by genuine, constant anxiety over ongoing conflict with Native American tribes along the frontier, and a devout Puritan worldview that took the literal, active presence of the devil in daily life as an unquestioned reality rather than a metaphor. Into this environment of pre-existing suspicion and fear, the accusations of witchcraft didn't emerge from nowhere. They found exactly the conditions needed to spread like wildfire. The afflicted girls, under intense pressure from adults demanding to know who was tormenting them, began naming names. Their first accusations targeted 3 women who existed on the margins of respectable Puritan society: an enslaved woman named Tituba, a homeless beggar named Sarah Good, and an elderly woman named Sarah Osborne who had a poor reputation in the community, individuals who fit the profile of who Puritan society already viewed with suspicion long before any formal accusation was made. What made the Salem trials so uniquely destructive, compared to earlier isolated witchcraft accusations that had occurred sporadically throughout colonial New England, was the specific legal mechanism the court employed to evaluate evidence, something called spectral evidence, testimony in which an accuser claimed to see the spirit or apparition of the accused person tormenting them, even while the actual physical body of the accused sat visibly restrained in the courtroom, unable to have committed any physical act at all. This meant convictions could be secured based entirely on subjective, unverifiable claims that a person's spirit had appeared to someone in a dream or vision, evidence that provided no meaningful way for an accused person to mount any genuine defense, since there was no physical act to dispute, only a claim about their invisible spiritual presence that could never be disproven. As the trials progressed through the summer of 1692, the accusations spiraled dramatically beyond the initial marginalized targets, eventually ensnaring respected church members, a former minister, and even the wife of the colony's governor, demonstrating how completely the panic had escaped any semblance of rational containment, reaching a point where genuine social status or reputation offered no protection whatsoever once an accusation had been made. Confession, disturbingly, often provided the only reliable path to survival, since those who confessed to witchcraft and then named additional accomplices were frequently spared execution, while those who maintained their innocence faced significantly higher odds of being convicted and put to death, creating a horrifying incentive structure that actively rewarded false confession and further accusation over honest denial. One of the most harrowing individual cases involved Giles, an 80-year-old farmer who refused to enter any plea at all when formally charged, understanding that under the legal procedures of the time, a person who refused to plead could not be formally tried. Though this refusal came with its own horrific consequence, the court ordered him subjected to a brutal form of torture called pressing, in which heavy stones were placed on his chest in an attempt to force a plea over the course of 2 days. Corey never entered a plea, reportedly only demanding more weight be added as he was slowly crushed to death, becoming the only person in American history executed by this specific method. By the time the hysteria finally began to collapse in late 1692, largely due to growing public unease as accusations reached increasingly prominent and clearly implausible targets, combined with formal intervention from colonial authorities who began restricting the use of spectral evidence in court proceedings, 20 people had been executed, 19 by hanging and Giles Corey by pressing, and at least 5 more accused individuals had died in prison while awaiting trial. Victims of the harsh, unsanitary conditions common to colonial imprisonment of the era. In the years that followed, several of the judges, jurors, and accusers involved in the trials publicly expressed remorse, with one judge, Samuel Sewall, later standing before his congregation to formally confess his guilt and responsibility for the wrongful deaths, one of the few public acts of accountability from anyone directly involved in the proceedings. The Massachusetts colonial government eventually passed formal legislation restoring the good names of those convicted and providing financial compensation to surviving family members, though this formal reversal came decades after the actual executions, offering no comfort whatsoever to the people who had already died. Modern historians continue to debate the precise combination of factors that allowed the Salem panic to spiral so catastrophically out of control, with theories ranging from genuine psychological mass hysteria triggered by extreme religious anxiety and social stress, to more speculative modern theories suggesting the initial girl's symptoms might have resulted from ergot poisoning, a toxic mold contamination of rye grain capable of producing hallucinations and convulsions, though this specific theory remains contested and unproven among historians studying the events. What remains undisputed, regardless of the precise triggering cause, is that an entire community, driven by genuine fear, unresolved social tensions, and a judicial system willing to accept invisible, unfalsifiable evidence as grounds for execution, turned against itself with a speed and totality that still stands as one of history's most studied examples of how quickly fear can override reason when a community collectively decides to stop questioning the accusations in front of it. 300 years later, the site of the Salem trials remains a permanent, sobering reminder of exactly how fragile the line between justice and mass hysteria can become, and how easily an entire community can convince itself that the absence of evidence is somehow itself the most damning evidence of all. If stories like this, where an entire town's fear became more dangerous than anything they claimed to be afraid of, are exactly what you come here for, subscribe to The Grave Details, because history holds more stories like this than most people will ever know.